Hey detoxers, welcome to the Disinfo Detox, where we cut through the noise to bring you the stories that matter. Today we're delving into the intricate web of oligarchy and media influence in the early days of President Donald Trump's second term. Indeed, whether it be previous rivals such as Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg coming over to the Trump camp, or former Democrat supporters such as Elon Musk giving money to join Donald Trump and be a major part of transforming the government with little to no oversight, it seems like oligarchy is striking back in a major way in the United States. Indeed, some people are even saying we're in a second Gilded Age. Joining us to unpack all of this is political sociologist Peter Phillips, author of two phenomenal books on the topic. The first is Giants, the Global Power Elite, and the second is Titans of Capital. Phillips has extensively researched the concentration of global capital and its implications for democracy. Together, we'll explore how media conglomerates and elite networks influence policy and public opinion in this new political landscape. Peter Phillips, welcome to Disinfo Detox.
Nolan, thank you for having me on.
Let's talk about some of your work. Can you remind our audience a little bit about what you did in Giants and Titans, and then we'll talk about how that's relevant today.
Well, Giants, I looked at the Giants are at that time, $17 trillion investment management companies. Now, these are companies that take capital from rich people and manage it and try to give them a 6 to 10% return, sometimes higher. And they had, at that point, 17 that had over $1 trillion, collectively managed $41 trillion worth of capital. And they had like 200 directors. So I identified who those people were and said, hey, these are the people that are managing the world's wealth. Now, 5 years later, we've seen the number of giant corporations that have $1 trillion double to over 30. They're now managing $83 trillion worth of capital. And this started to get so big that I said, well, let's narrow this down so we can look at it sociologically. And so I took the top 10. And the top 10 investment management companies, BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, today have over $50 trillion worth of capital. So they've doubled their concentration. And there's 117 people that manage that wealth. So they are all in themselves millionaires or billionaires, but there's many other people just as rich or richer. What makes them significant is that they get to decide where that money is going to be invested. So they have, they can say, okay, we're going to go in oil, we're going to go in military companies, and they do. They're literally in everything that has a possible return in the world. And this is so concentrated that like 60% is in the U.S. Part of it is spread around other nations in the world. France is second, Germany is third. I mean, England is right in there. So this is wealth money that's in excess of what's invested in stocks and stuff like that. And it's around 100 trillion right now worldwide, and it's in the West. The Chinese have about 5% of it, but it's really concentrated in the West, and it has some really negative consequences for everybody. It means that the rich are getting richer, the wealth is being concentrated, and we got 180 million new people in extreme poverty in the world in the last 5 years. So part of that was because of the pandemic, but the pandemic just accelerated wealth concentration. So this inequality in the world today is killing 20,000 people a day, and that are dying from starvation or easily curable diseases. So I mean, that's a massacre, literally, of human beings dying because of inequality. Well, that's what the main point of the two books are. But I go in great detail and show how this is happening, who these people are.
Yeah, you do that really, really well throughout the book. And something that I wanted to ask on that is, so whenever you, not just you, but someone in the United States typically critiques the concentration of wealth in the hands of the few, they're often sort of derided with like these kind of dismissive questions like, well, what's your problem? Do you not want rich people to get rich? And I think oftentimes, people on the left or progressives will respond and say like, no, we just think we need a social safety net to take care of people. And I agree with all that. But I think there's another element that we often kind of ignore, which is the ways in which concentration of wealth enables economic power to transition into political power. And this is where it starts to chip away at democracy, right? Can you talk a little bit about that, about how economic power transitions into political power?
Yeah, and I want to preface by saying that William I. Robinson at UC Berkeley, I mean UC Santa Barbara, is one of the main scholars on concentration power and elites. And he's talking about a world crisis of humanity. He's saying that are facing, because of the environmental, the threats of war, increased concentration of wealth threatens the survival of humans. And that's pretty serious. So politically, that means that the wealth is being used to facilitate, to expand, and support this continued concentration. So Western governments are essentially pro-capital, and they're definitely pro-capitalist, but that means that they encourage, they support wealth concentration. And that's what the police states are for. That's what the military is for. I mean, the U.S. has 800 military bases around the world. That's not to protect us. It's to protect global capital. And so that whole military budget it's really about any nation state that interferes with capital usage, or doesn't give the capital investment a fair opportunity, is undermined and threatened. So of course the Russia and China and Cuba and those are totally negated, and tried attempts are to undermine them completely. China, of course, is on par with the U.S. now in terms of economic power, and they, in fact, if you add the buying power of the people into the equation, they have stronger economic power than the U.S. The U.S. still claims that they have a higher GDP, and that's being debated, but it's certainly they're close in that regard. But the buying power of the Chinese people now, because the Chinese people eliminated extreme poverty in China. They completely eliminated extreme poverty, and that was for a while. Extreme poverty was going down in the world, and the capitals were saying, "Oh, look, we're getting better." It was only going down because the Chinese eliminated it. Extreme poverty is $2.15 a day, so you imagine trying to live on that. And they still have several hundred million people living on $5 a day, which is still pretty poor. But the Chinese have a philosophy called Chaofun that means that they are supporting minimal standards of living for all human beings, and that's a pretty important step right there. Now, the World Economic Forum claims that they're trying to improve capitalism in the world to improve world health and people and that, but they've had zero impact. Their policies and their recommendations, the companies aren't doing it. So we're seeing this continued concentration of capital and wealth, and it is endangering all of us.
One of the things I admire about your work, I mean, you're dealing with your work is talking about some very powerful entities and folks abusing their power and horrible outcomes for the poorer folks, those in extreme poverty. One of the things I admire about your work, you have often put an optimistic spin on this. I remember you one time talked about how, well, you said you were trying to catalog all these different names of these super wealthy people to try and open up dialogue with them, right? To try and communicate with them, particularly around issues of climate change. And I've been thinking about that a lot. I've been, thinking about what we're seeing in terms of just the complete rapacious oligarchy that's happening in government right now, and thinking about what I would say to those folks, and I've been thinking about like it's kind of the easy way or the hard way. That this happens over and over again throughout history. I mean, the easy way is the super wealthy participate and create some process of a social safety net and redistribution that's keeps enough of the people happy. The hard way is you end up with a lot more Luigi Mangionis, right? So, what do you perceive when you talk about how we need to open up dialogue with these folks? What would be the types of things you think you would say, or do you think they need to hear that just they're not understanding or hearing?
Well, but in the book, I identify the managers of the top 10 capital investment companies. I identify them by name, where they went to school, who they're interacting with, their net wealth, the other boards of directors that they're on. In fact, those 117 people, they're on the board of directors of 133 other corporations besides the top 10 capital investment companies. Those 133 companies have a greater annual income than the GDP of every nation in the world except China, Japan, and the US. So it's heavily concentrated, not just in the capital that they manage, but also they're managing these huge companies that are doing, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of actual money. It's close to 5 trillion. And so that power, the ability to use that kind of money is pretty strongly controlling. So Trump, of course, is facilitating that, but the Democrats did the same. And the fact that Elon Musk is on Trump's cabinet, the richest man in the world, of course, is a joke, but it's also symbolic of what their main interests are. And the fact that Trump feeds into his ego and allows him to have a chainsaw on on television, cutting the government, is absurd. But it's also based upon the lies, and that we can make what better democracy by having concentrated capital managing us. I mean, that's basically what they're saying.
Yeah, right. And because I mean, yeah, you said the lies. Like Elon famously has released this like Excel sheet where he said he saved 55 billion. But even if you add up the sheet, assume the sheet is real, it was somewhere around like 16 billion, and an 8 billion marker I think was actually like 800,000 or 8 million. So the whole notion that he's actually saving money has been questioned. But I want to flip kind of flip the script because it's very easy to point out the oligarchy and the Trump administration, like you said, they're doing it right in your front of your face. I'm more interested in the lack of resistance by the Democrats because I remember during the Bush administration, Bush made some like offhanded joke about how a dictatorship would be okay if as long as I was the dictator.
But that's okay. If this were a dictatorship, it'd be a heck of a lot easier. Just so long as I'm the dictator.
And he laughed, and the left was outraged. They said, "No, in this country, we don't even joke about being a dictator." And now Trump is out there openly calling himself the king.
Long live the king. And this is after he ended New York's congestion pricing. Of course, the founders of the US famously left my homeland of England precisely because they don't want to live under a king.
And the response from Democrats has been pretty dismal. I saw, for example, James Carville recently on CNN saying, like, well, the only strategy for Democrats is to do nothing. Let the Republicans cut everything, and then the pain will be felt and people will turn to the Democrats.
James Carville, in a new op-ed for the New York Times, suggests the party for the moment do nothing. Quote, with no clear leader to voice our opposition and no control in any branch of government, he writes, it's time for Democrats to embark on the most daring political maneuver in the history of our party. Roll over and play dead. Allow the Republicans to crumble beneath their own weight and make the American people miss us.
But that's like the same strategy Dems have been using for like 40 years, which is don't run on anything, don't offer anything, just run as not Republicans. And meanwhile, there's a hunger out there, right? We see Bernie Sanders traveling around the country right now. He's on an anti-oligarchy campaign, drawing these huge crowds.
One in, but that's not enough. Behind those guys are the kind of poor billionaires. They only are worth, 10, 20 billion. 13 of them who were nominated by Trump to be in his cabinet.
So, what do you make of the Democrats, not attempting to try and tap into this real frustration and anger with what's going on with oligarchs such as Elon in Trump's second term?
Well, the capital has interpenetrated both parties. They're both dependent upon wealth to continue to um, have a political party, and they're not threatened enough. These elites are not threatened. They're comfortable in terms of what they're doing. Their wealth is being increased, and this isn't the 1930s and the Great Depression. So it was in the 30s where we got the Social Security Act and the National Labor Relations Act, and both in 35. And they were passed. I did a study on this. They were passed in Congress primarily because elites were afraid that a communist revolution was going to happen in the United States. I mean, they were. I mean, and I looked at the transcripts of They tried to get the bills through in 34, and I compared to what was being said in 35. And in 35, you had the general strike in San Francisco or the West Coast, massive civil unrest around the country. Civil, the public, the military guard had been called out in more states in 34 than any other time in U.S. history to repress, people challenging capital and civil unrest and violence. And so they were afraid that a communist revolution, like what happened in Russia, was going to happen here in the United States. And they expressed that in the hearings before those bills were passed. So I compared the 2 years, and it was much more saying the communists are going to take over. We got to pass this bill that happened in 35. So when they passed Social Security, that of course created, you know, insurance for aged. It created a national welfare program, AFDC, for families around the country. And it allowed, and the Labor Relations Act allowed and required mandated negotiations between companies and unions. And so that was a huge shift. So the New Deal was a major shift in terms of that, and they've been trying to dismantle it ever since. Elites have. I mean, they really have. And but they don't feel threatened enough. There's no civil unrest like there was back in the 30s that is, identifying them. So we have to not only talk about this, talk about the poverty, because in many ways, with so many people dying, I mean, when we have 120 million people in the country, in the United States, that have inadequate nutrition and health care. So this is pretty serious, and we need to we can identify. So I tell you who the people are. We can write them. We can call them up. We could demand a sharing of the wealth. I mean, even just 5% would eliminate poverty in the world of what they manage and control. So I point my finger right at those people and say, "You guys got to fix this."
Hmm.
And if you don't, um, we're faced with environmental destruction of the world, and or nuclear war.
Yeah, and that's right because a lot of this stuff is it's basically just for show, right? Even this supposed that they're going to round up 12 million undocumented immigrants. They're unable to get anywhere near that. I think if they keep going at the pace they're going now, it would take them 25 years to get there. Or these big cuts that Doge is doing turn out not to be true. So it's all like tinkering at the edges to convince people something is being done to improve their material conditions, but in reality, it's not at all, right? And
Well, they're going
I
to share it with us too. We're each going to get a check for 5,000, right?
5,000. I heard we only get $33. Maybe I should change my mind about Doge. Um,
No,
uh,
I mean, yeah,
yeah,
it's absurd. They can, basically the media is going right along with um, what the agenda is for capital, and
yeah,
of course, media is owned by capital. So if you're too liberal of a news host, um, your long-term survival as a news host in any of the media today is going to be limited. And we see the changes MSNBC did just this week. So that's pretty serious, and which is why I wrote the book, because we need to know who these people are and what they're doing to us, and how we're being impacted. And sooner or later, a social movement, Occupy, was one that scared them significantly, because it was young people challenging capital elites, and spontaneously emerging in cities all over the country. So a police state repression happened. All of those groups were infiltrated, and they were able to repress it. But that sort of a thing can happen again. It's hard to make it happen, but it can happen again. And as that does, we have to support it. We have to really get behind it in a big way. But we also have to continue to challenge elites to testify to the inequalities and the consequences of what's happening, the long-term impacts of environmental issues. I mean, the oil companies haven't declined selling gas. I mean, it's just doubled in the last 5 years. And the big investment companies are going right along with it. I mean, they're putting their money right into oil and gas all over the world. And so this global warming, if anything, they'll try to deny it or say global warming isn't really happening, which is what Trump is trying to do by shutting down research and news sites or governmental websites that document what's happening. But I don't think you can repress information that should be and can be publicly available unless you just totally repress it and lie. And we may get to that level.
Absolutely. And as we talk about confronting oligarchs, I think it's also worth having just a conversation about democracy, right? There's a lot of folks worry that this is the end of American democracy, or certainly a very weakened American democracy we're living through right now. And as you were talking there, you mentioned the importance of media and activism. Can you talk a little bit more and explain, the role that media and activism will play, and in some cases won't play, in resisting this oligarchy?
Well, media is, of course, the only way that people can find out about what's really happening, unless they read books, and most people don't. And media is immediate; it's attention grabbing, and what stories are selected by media tend to reinforce the idea of capital concentration is good. Wealth trickles down and everybody benefits. And that's just a big lie. And it's simply not true. And the environmental and the threats of war are very serious, and we have to take them that way. And we have to remind the elites that they've got grandchildren, or they will have grandchildren, if they, that won't have grandchildren if we don't reverse what's happening in the world today. So, I mean, they're all threatened. And I don't know if they think that they can have an estate in Patagonia, and then if the world goes nuclear, that they're going to be able to live there and everything will be fine. But that's simply a state of denial. I mean, if we have a nuclear war, everybody's dead.
All right. Well, Peter Phillips, it's been a pleasure. I encourage everyone, go out, get the books, read Giants, read Titans. You won't regret it. It gives you so much insight, an easy way to cut through the din and propaganda of corporate media.
Hey Detoxers! We hope you enjoyed that clip. If you want to check out more, you can find full episodes and other clips on YouTube, as well as on all the major podcast platforms, and of course, by subscribing on Substack at nolanhigdon.substack.com. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. It really helps us out and it keeps those tech overlords happy. See you next time. Detox complete.